In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this super creamy, cheesy, delicious, crispy bacon on the top mashed potato casserole. Let's get started.
We're going to start off here by scrubbing our potatoes. I have 3 pounds of potatoes, and this is a great time if you happen to have a little helper in the house to get them involved. Once you get your potatoes cleaned and scrubbed, we're going to come over here to the cutting board and go ahead and peel them. You can definitely leave your peels on for this recipe if you want to, or you can peel them, totally up to you. Get them peeled, and then we are going to chop them up. The most important thing to remember when you're chopping up your potatoes is to keep the size as even as possible. As I'm chopping these, I'm putting them into my pan over here, and then once I have them all chopped, I've covered them up with cool water. I also like to flavor the water that I'm cooking my potatoes in anytime I make mashed potatoes. That's because the starch in the potatoes is going to absorb the cooking water. The more flavor the water has, the more flavor your potatoes are going to have in the end. I like to use iodized salt, pepper, a bay leaf, and a little bit of garlic powder. These are going onto the stove on high heat. Next thing I'm going to do is cut up a shallot. Obviously, I'm going to peel it, and then I'm going to slice it into thin little slices, kind of lengthwise like so. Didn't mean to cut the top off there, but that's okay. Then I'm going to cut it into strips, and then I'm going to turn it sideways and cut it into a dice. These are going to be part of the topping that we're going to make later on for our potatoes. Set the shallots over to the side, and now we're dealing with our bacon. A little tip here for you: when you need to cut up bacon, if you put it into the freezer for 20 to 30 minutes before you start cutting it up, it will make it much easier because it won't be quite so wiggly when you're trying to cut it. I'm going to cut this bacon into small pieces, and then I'm going to put it into this pan. Over here I have my pan nice and hot, and I did put about a tablespoon of olive oil into it as well. I'm going to saute this bacon around until it starts to let go of some of its fat. Once it gets like this, I'm going to go ahead and add my shallots into my bacon. These, again, are going to be part of the topping that we're going to put onto our mashed potatoes. So I just want to cook this around for a couple of minutes until my bacon starts to let go of a lot of its fat and until a few of the pieces are starting to crisp up. I don't want it to get too crispy at this point because I don't want it to burn in the oven. So once a few pieces are looking a little bit crispy, go ahead and turn that off. Meanwhile, we're going to check on our potatoes. When you check your potatoes, you put a fork down into one of them and it should break apart like so. These took 20 to 25 minutes from the time they started boiling. I'm going to drain my potatoes and take them over here. In this little container, I have 4 tablespoons of that bacon fat, and it is still super hot, so be careful. I'm also adding a little bit of nutmeg. Not only is nutmeg great for cream, which is going to go into these potatoes, but it's also a really nice complement to your mashed potatoes. It's just a tiny little background flavor. I also added some garlic powder and 4 ounces of cream cheese. I will give all of these measurements in the description, so don't worry about trying to keep up as I'm naming them off. This is a half of a cup of sour cream which is going in. The sour cream and the cream cheese are a really great addition in here because they both have kind of that little twangy taste to them. It's going to be a really nice contrast to the amount of fat that is going into this dish. You don't want to just put like fat. You need some acid in there to balance it out, which is in that sour cream, and it's going to really be a nice complement. Here I'm adding in a half of a cup of heavy whipping cream, and again, that's going to be really nice with that nutmeg that we put in there earlier, and it's going to give a really nice creaminess to our potatoes. I'm going to mix that in, and then once I get it nice and mixed, I want to do a little bit of a taste test. So on the taste test, I am going to be checking for the amount of salt and pepper, which is our seasoning, and I also am kind of trying to decide if it's creamy enough. You want to make sure that you have a pretty creamy texture because these are going into the oven and they will lose a little bit of moisture in there. I'm also adding in just a little bit more kosher salt and quite a bit of fresh ground black pepper, which is going to really complement the bacon. And in this particular case, I also had to add in just a little bit more nutmeg. You don't want like a huge nutmeg flavor in there, but my nutmeg was kind of old because it was from last year, so I needed a little bit more. If you're using fresh nutmeg, you probably won't need to add more in. I also added in a 1/4 of a cup of Parmesan cheese, and you should have a 1/4 cup set over to the side, which will be part of our topping later. I want to mix all of this stuff in and then again give it a nice little taste test. Not just because I'm hungry and these are delicious, but because, I also want to make sure the flavors are right. Again, I said earlier I was kind of talking about how it's going to lose the moisture in the oven, so you really want to make sure these are super, super creamy. I decided to add another 1/4 cup of the heavy cream, and I also put in my cup of cheddar cheese. I mixed that around, and I can already tell just by looking at it that it has the perfect texture now. Of course, I snuck a little bite, and just to make sure again of the seasoning, which was perfect by the way, but here I want to show you the texture. They're almost too creamy if you were serving them right now, but that is what you want, because when you put these into the oven, they are going to lose some of the moisture. So I wanted them to be just a little bit extra creamy going in. I'm going to put these into my casserole dish. So this is a 9 by 13 dish, and I sprayed it with cooking spray so that nothing would stick. And my husband just handed me a glass of wine, so cheers to everybody. And now I'm going to spread out my potatoes. So spread these into a nice flat little layer. Now these instructions are only for those of you who are making these a day ahead of time. If you're not making this a day ahead of time, you do not have to do this, and we do still have a topping to make. So if you're going to make these ahead of time, go ahead and put a layer of plastic wrap directly on your mashed potatoes. They need to touch the plastic directly so that you don't end up with that condensation sticking to your foil, which is our next layer. You don't want all of the moisture leaving and then getting thrown out with your foil in a little while. So you're going to cover this up and put it in the fridge. The next day, you'll take the foil off, but don't throw it away because you're going to use it. Remove the plastic wrap and then put the foil back on top. These are going to go back into the oven. These are going to go into the oven for the first time at 350 degrees for 15 minutes, and then you're going to take them out, stir them up, and flatten them back down, and then you're going to be right back where we are now. So mine did not go into the refrigerator overnight. They're already warm from being on the stove. Those were only the, make ahead instructions. So we all have that, right? Great. Okay. So that's my bacon from earlier, and I'm adding a cup of cheddar cheese in there, and I'm also adding a 1/4 cup of Parmesan. And again, I will put all of the measurements down in the description. Stir that up until you have it mixed together really nicely, and then we're going to go over here to our potatoes. I'm going to put the mixture right on top and then spread it into a nice even layer. Once I get it spread out, this is going to go back into the oven at 350 degrees for about another 15 minutes. This is going to give a chance for that bacon, which we didn't crisp up earlier, to get nice and crispy and perfect while it's in there now. So while that's in the oven, I'm going to cut up my green onions. I don't need the white parts, I'm only going to use the green part. The green onions are a really nice addition to this dish because not only do they add color, but they add a little bit of freshness to it. If you have a high-fat dish, again, like this definitely is. I mean, we put heavy cream, bacon grease, cheese, like everything, is pretty high fat going in. So you want that little element of freshness in there somewhere too. So these green onions are going to bring really a nice pretty color to the top along with a little bit of freshness. As you can see, this just came out of the oven. The bacon that's on top is beautifully crisped up, and this is going to be perfect for serving with anything that you would normally have mashed potatoes with.